I was very inspired by what you said about democracy and freedom. But I think we have to recognize that the same kind of happiness, if you will, and hope existed in the post-colonial period in many of these places. And we are just at the beginning of this story. And we know that the Islamists are very patient. They were there when post-colonialism and nationalism and all of that failed. And they emerge out of that. The fact that you pointed out that an Islamist is not putting himself up for a candidate for the presidency or for the government or for the leadership in Egypt seems to me to be another example of their patience and waiting for this system in some way to fail. Because for democracy and freedom to really work, you need organization, you need institutions. And what the Islamists have is that organization, schools, mosques, an agenda, a political program. So I'm wondering, right now it looks like democracy is ascendant and secularism is alive and well. But the fact that the Islamists are not participating in this round of things may simply be a strategy or a tactic for when this fails to deliver on all the promises because the hopefulness is so high, and when that hope is not fulfilled, as it was not fulfilled in the post-colonial period, then Islamism becomes much more attractive. I'd just like to hear your comments.
Well, I can give you an example. Why it's, if we ask ourselves, why the military regime successful after post-colonialism? Immediately the answer, because all the militaries in the state after they left by colonization, after the colonization, during after Second World War, the military always in each country was the most powerful and well organized, can establish the state rather than other organizations. This has happened most of the third world. I cannot deny that is the Islamist well organized in the Middle East. But we actually, all the people now, they were afraid themselves about the Islamists. They would like to establish, to achieve somehow the democracy in their levels. So it cannot be say it's again, this is the ghost. Is if the military is gone, or the dictatorial, so the other solution will be the Islamist. Perhaps the Islamists can be now, if will be through the democratic development, they actually will form themselves through again the new parties. This is the parties will be kind of play through the civil society, and they're actually their right to express their voice. So I don't think this will be a problem. I will give you an example, for example, in India. In India, we're because it's diverse. In India, it's one of the main part democracy in the world. After they lost the Conference Party led by Gandhi, in fact, they became the Hindus parties, which are quite radical movement for the Hindus. Never been any people actually suspect the Hindu would be more aggressive and fundamentalist religion through their parties. They achieved actually economically during their period. They led actually more than 3 times in 12 years. But immediately later they were lost. Why? Because all the people, the important for India is diversity. They lost their diversity and the support. India cannot be established by Hindu. They have a Christian, they have Muslims, they have different Buddhists. So immediately they actually aligned against them. So I think Islamists, if they would like to lead in their aggressive or in their, they immediately will be lost.
Actually, let me add to that the following. First of all, I do not minimize at all the potential risk that Islamist groups across the region can cause, both for the societies there and for the rest of the world. However, I would caution you about the following. The underlying narrative that you presented, I would argue, is Islamist. I'll tell you why. Because you assume that Islamists were there at the end of colonialism and they were patient. The fact of the matter, Islamism is a product of the 20th century and actually the second half of the 20th century. They were not there. Simply, they were not there after at the end of the colonial period. Actually, you're right about noting one thing is that the end of colonialism brought in a liberal euphoria of sorts. We are going to make these societies whole, we are going to move forward, etc. But that liberal euphoria, despite the fact that in the case of Egypt and in the case of Iraq, you did have mass movements, the 1919 mass movement in Egypt and 1920 in Iraq. However, the liberalism that was expressed throughout there was a top-down elitist liberalism. The idea is that the elites, and they're largely derived from the Ottoman bureaucracy and military establishment, thought of, we are going to imbue these backward layers of society with structures and with reason and with education, etc. Now, the difference between then and now is that these movements are not driven by elites. Actually, people are at a loss trying to identify who is a leader in here or who can speak for the movement. And actually, this will emerge, but it's not going to be one voice. And again, I'm not predicting success. I'm simply saying the opportunities are considerably different. Now, the fact that the Islamists have structures, no question. However, and this is why I said that the underlying narrative that you have is Islamist, because one, you assumed a perenniality that they do not have. They were not there. They're a recent phenomenon, inspired as much.
The Muslim Brothers.
The Muslim Brotherhood started in the 1928. So they were not there in 1919, and they were not lurking. You see, actually, when they started actually with the intent of reforming the individual. And again, inspired by whom? Inspired by the European notion of the new man. You see, the idea is that this is a new century, a new man, a new Muslim. And the whole notion of Islamizing a Muslim society, can you imagine how offensive that is if we do not adhere to the fact that it is inspired by Europe? Meaning, you want to Islamize me, I'm a Muslim. What do you mean to Islamize me? I'm a Muslim and a secular. There's no contradiction. It's not up to you to say otherwise. I'm saying this is item one. This is why I said the underlying narrative is Islamist. The other item is the whole notion that they are so organized. And they have so many structures and so many institutions. The fact of the matter, their propaganda works very well because they offer very little. And in some cases, I'm not going to deny the fact that in some cases they assume functions that the state or other civil society that has been prohibited by the state to act is offering. But if you look consistently throughout, their bark is far louder than their bite throughout. Okay, and now we have the opportunity for those who actually have the ability to do something in this new environment of relative freedom to step up. I mean, societies throughout, and again, with the differences, I recognize the differences between every single society and the other, but societies throughout have exhibited tremendous amount of forms of resistance to this totalitarian claim that we are one and the same and our only label is Muslim, from the bottom up. And I'm hoping that this will continue. I'm saying our role in helping that is tangential. It is not central, it's not essential, and it's largely, we have to make sure that we do not help their opponents. We do not help the Islamists. It's not that much a question of helping the liberals and the Democrats and the seculars and the would-be liberals and Democrats and seculars. It's not a question of how much we help them. It's a question of how much we do not help their enemies.